When people talk about VR, the first thing they usually mention is image quality. But over the years, I've noticed something interesting. The most immersive VR experiences I've ever had almost nothing to do with resolution. They were about something completely different. In this video, I want to show you some of the most intense VR experiences I've ever seen or tried, from motion simulators to freewalk VR to flight experiences where you actually feel like you are flying. Hi, my name is Stefan, your VR accomplice. Enjoy the video. In my last video, I talked about the magic of VR and about how many people, myself included, go through phases where that magical feeling becomes a little weaker. Not because VR is getting worse. In fact, the technology keeps improving. But our brain gets used to it. One idea that came up in that discussion was this. Maybe we can bring some of that magic back by increasing the level of immersion. Not visually, but by involving the whole body. And when I started thinking about it, I realized that I've already experienced a few things that go exactly in that direction. So in this video, I want to explore a simple question: what happens when VR engages the entire body? But why does physical involvement increase the immersion so much? VR is essentially trying to convince our brain that something is real. And when you think about it, that's actually quite amazing. Because technically in VR, we are not really looking into the distance. The image is created on displays just a few centimeters in front of your eyes. In reality, we are just looking at a relatively small flat screen. And yet our brain turns that into a three-dimensional world. We feel depth, we judge distances, we feel like we are standing inside a real environment. Our brain accepts that illusion surprisingly quickly. But real-world perception involves much more than vision. In the real world, we feel the ground under our feet. If we sit in a car, we feel acceleration and forces on our body. Or we feel wind blowing into our faces. All these physical signals are part of how we perceive reality. And this is where things get interesting. Because many of these sensations can actually be simulated in VR. Motion, forces, haptics, wind. And the more of our senses are involved, the more convincing the illusion becomes. A great example of this are motion rigs or motion simulators. About a year ago, I had the chance to try one. I visited a friend who had built his own 6-stop motion rig, and inside that rig you could experience different simulations. Driving a truck, racing on a track, or flying a fighter jet in DCS World, for example. And I have to say, that was a completely new level of immersion for me, especially in the flight simulator. I honestly didn't want to get out. The motion rig managed to convince my brain that I was sitting in a real fighter jet flying through the air at high speed, and many small details helped to create the illusion. A real seatbelt that you had to buckle, a joystick with force feedback, a realistic throttle, and the physical controls even looked similar to the instruments inside the virtual cockpit. The driving simulation was similar. A steering wheel with strong force feedback, a real gear shifter, pedals for throttle and brake, combined with the movement of the motion rig. Suddenly you feel acceleration, you feel cornering forces, you feel the car reacting to the track. And that makes everything feel incredibly real. By the way, I actually made a separate video about this motion rig already on my German channel. Another very immersive experience I tried was freewalk VR. One example is Sandbox VR. I went there once with a group of friends and we tried several small VR games together. The special thing about this setup is you're not just standing in one place like in most VR games at home. Instead, you actually move through a physical space. We could walk around, turn and move freely within a defined area. At the same time, we could interact with the virtual environment. In some scenes, we even felt wind effects when it made sense in the situation. We also held real objects in our hands that represented things in the game, like weapons or magical tools. And we were Haptic Vests. So when something happened in the game, like being hit or an explosion, you actually felt it on your body. You are really moving, you react to other players, you hold physical objects and you feel feedback on your body. The technical effort behind these experiences is enormous, but that's exactly what creates such a high level of immersion. And I've also made a separate video about that experience on my German channel. So far, these were all experiences I was actually able to try myself, but there are many more technologies that could push VR immersion even further. Some of them I unfortunately haven't tested yet, but they are fascinating because they all follow the same idea: experiencing VR not just visually, but with the entire body. Let's talk about VR treadmills. Many people probably know this idea from the movie Ready Player One. Players stand on a platform and feel like they can walk freely through a virtual world. One well-known example is the Virtuix Omni One. With this system you can actually walk, run, lean or crouch. All these movements are directly translated into the virtual environment. So it feels like you are really moving through a world, even though physically you stay in the same place. The technology still has challenges, but it's definitely a very interesting direction. Another fascinating concept is Wingsuit VR. Most people have probably seen those videos of people jumping off cliffs with wingsuits and flying through narrow mountain valleys. Some VR installations try to recreate exactly that experience. In some setups you're actually suspended on cables in a flying position and even have to perform the jump yourself. Wind is simulated blowing into your face, and by moving your body you can influence your flight direction. Even just thinking about that concept, I can imagine that it must feel incredibly intense. One particularly impressive system is the bHaptics VR flight simulator by Somniacs. With bHaptics you can experience what it feels like to actually fly. For example, like a bird or even like a butterfly. You lie in a special flying position, your arms become the wings, you have to flap your arms yourself and lean your body to steer through the air. At the same time, wind is generated and blown into your face. bHaptics even advertises that using Google Earth, you can theoretically start flying from almost any place on Earth. I haven't had the chance to try it yet, but just from the concept alone, it sounds incredibly immersive. When you look at all these examples, something interesting becomes clear. The most powerful VR experiences often don't come from better graphics or higher resolution. They happen when more of our body becomes part of the experience. When we don't just see the world, but actually move inside it. When we feel forces. When we feel wind on our face. When we get physical feedback. So maybe the next big step in VR immersion won't come only from better displays. Maybe it comes from involving more of our senses. More movement, more physical feedback, a stronger connection between the virtual world and our real body. And maybe that's also one way to bring back some of the magic of VR I talked about in my last video. So, I'm curious, when did VR feel the most immersive to you? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed exploring the deeper side of VR technology like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Tschüss!